Welcome to the Bay Area Mock Draft Spectacular. This is a very special episode. I'm here with Josh. He's someone I coached in high school football. Some of you know him in the league, that is in this league. Some of you don't. Josh has his own Raider and Niner podcast. Josh, what's your podcast?
Yeah, so on YouTube, you can go ahead and type in @SilverAndGoldPod. So essentially, we are a football podcast that goes into topics talking about the 49ers and talking about the Raiders. My friend Mike is a Raider fan, so he kind of spearheads the Raider side of things, but we both just sort of jump on and give our opinions. So if you want to see, let's just say you're a 49er fan and you want, the 49er fan perspective, or at least my perspective as a 49er fan, you would get that, but you would also get like an outside perspective as opposed to maybe other channels that are talking about, the 49ers, maybe both talking heads or people who are hosting the show are sort of tunnel vision towards the 49ers. So what we try to do is give more than one perspective. And, we have very long shows. We don't go live every single week. We do during the season, but in the off season, we wait for there to be actually, a lot of topics to talk about. We take comments live. So, if you guys want to check out the channel, I think Coach Ingalls is going to link it in the description. Silver and Gold Pod. We hope to see you guys there and take your comments.
Yeah, so this whole draft spectacular is presented by the Silver and Gold Pod. So go ahead and give them check them out after. So we're gonna get started here. We have our Bay Area mock draft spectacular.
And it's going to be spectacular. Yeah,
we're gonna
you guys see that trophy right there. If you guys want to win the championship in your league, this is the league trophy for my fantasy redraft league. So take my advice with a grain of salt, but you're probably going to want to listen, to what I have mocked here today.
Here we go. We're gonna have some talk about some rookies, some freshly draft players. We're gonna start off with round one, and I have the first overall pick. I've already told you what I'm doing with this pick, so this wasn't really had to get mocked because it's public knowledge. I've said it for a while. But the first overall pick to the B21 sweeps is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver, got drafted to the Arizona Cardinals with round one draft capital.
Yeah, like you said, you have mocked this because you know for a fact he's going to your team. And honestly, I see Marvin Harrison Jr. stepping in and giving sort of like what the pairing between DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray was back when Hopkins was still in the Cardinals. So, if it can be anything like that, I'd say it justifies the first round pick that you're going to be spending.
Yeah, this was a year of tanking in the making, and I like him as a prospect. He was the first wide receiver taken in the draft. Ohio State produces studs, so I'm very excited for this pick. But this is the next pick is going to be the first one that you actually mocked and picked, and we're going to introduce at the 102, Caleb Williams, quarterback of the Chicago Bears, who was the first overall pick in the draft.
Yeah. So when I take a look at Kyle MC212's team, I noticed that, they're pretty solid all around, but, really stacked at running back. So I don't see them taking, any skill position players. I really think that they have Trevor Lawrence and Bryce Young, so they could really use some help in the quarterback room. I think Caleb Williams is a solid pick because he's got weapons around him. He's got Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and then they just drafted Rome Odunze. And, if it's not Caleb Williams at this selection, I could have gone back and forth between, Caleb and Jaden Daniels, because Jaden Daniels provides the rushing upside. But I think Caleb Williams is probably the more sexy pick because he's got the weapons around him.
Yeah, that he does go into a team that's ready to roll. three wide receivers who are really good. They signed DeAndre Swift as a running back, so he has a solid running back. Probably one of the best situations for a rookie quarterback to roll into. And yeah, unless you really feel like Bryce Young's going to have a bounce back year, you're kind of rolling into the season with Trevor Lawrence, who's up and down.
This is make or break, I think, for Trevor Lawrence, because they have to. Have they determined whether or not they're going to pick up his 5th-year option?
I am not sure off the top of my head. I don't know when the 5th-year options for those players. I would assume they would have already had to have picked it up because he was in the same draft as
Trey Lance, and they just the Cowboys declined Trey Lance's 5th-year option. So I'm assuming that right now is the time frame of when that decision is going to be made. So I'd say Kyle MC 212, you're in prime position right now to take a quarterback. I think you're either going Caleb or you're going Jaden Daniels. But like I said, Caleb's the more sexy pick. I'm almost willing to lock it in.
All right. We'll move on to the next selection, which is also my selection. I had to trade up for this pick. I traded the 109 and 107 to move up because I want to get some top tier players. And you have me taking Jonathan Brooks, one of the consensus top running backs in the draft. He went to the Carolina Panthers in round 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think that Jonathan Brooks is maybe the only running back who is going to make an impact this season. I feel like a lot of the other running backs are going to be option Bs. And I think Jonathan Brooks has an opportunity to step in ahead of Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, and actually get some meaningful snaps for the Carolina Panthers. Say what you want about the quality of snaps that he's going to be getting behind that offensive line and just that, that Panthers team that isn't very strong. But, I think that B21 sweeps, your team, I think has one clear need, and it's running back. And I don't know. I was kind of in between Jonathan Brooks and our next player.
All right. Well, yeah, I think he not only comes right to Carolina and is their clear cut probably running back 1 if he's healthy with the ACL. He would come onto my team and be my clear cut running back 1 as well. My running back room is not looking too hot. But the next pick to Jeremy is Brock Bowers, tight end, Las Vegas, round 1 draft capital.
Yeah, so I need you to tell me, Jeremy is a 49er fan, right?
He is a 49er fan.
Okay, so it probably would pain him a little bit to have to take the Raider tight end. So, Jeremy, if you ever check out the Silver and Gold pod, I know that you're going to be checking out as a 49er fan. But what I will say about Brock Bowers is he was selected to the Raiders, who have, kind of lower end caliber quarterback play in the NFL. And one thing that we know about lower end quarterback play in the NFL is that they sort of favor the tight end position in terms of targets. And Brock Bowers wasn't drafted to be a blocking tight end. And say what you want about Michael Mayer, if the Raiders really are serious about Brock Bowers, he can be split out wide. He's going to be a receiving threat. And I either had Jeremy taking Brock Bowers or I had him going at number 3. But I know that you have TJ Hawkinson, Trey McBride, a couple tight ends. So I could see it going either way with these 2 picks. If he wasn't going to pick Brock Bowers, I could see a scenario where Bowers goes to number 3 and Jonathan Brooks goes to Jeremy's team at number 4. But I think that you could probably use Jonathan Brooks a little bit more, and Jeremy could probably use Brock Bowers a little bit more.
Yeah, I do have a decent tight end room. I think McBride's target share is going to get cut into a little bit, but hopefully Hawkinson comes back healthy for my own personal team. But yeah, no, Brock Bowers I think is a top pick. I was a little surprised, dynasty wise. I know Michael Mayer went in the first round of our rookie draft last year as one of the consensus top tight ends. But yeah, I definitely see like what you're saying with Mayer being more of the blocking guy and Bowers being more of the receiving threat.
Yeah, and then I mean, this sort of just opens up the door for the Raiders to just run more two tight end sets. I mean, they can they can utilize both weapons still, but what we saw from Michael Mayer last year was, he was incredibly underutilized, and wasn't necessarily like the best tight end, best fantasy tight end, player to use. He wasn't on a team most of the year in my league, but I know Dynasty works a little bit differently. So I think that Brock Bowers clearly jumps Michael Mayer on the depth chart, just given the draft capital that they used on him.
Oh yeah,
But they can both kind of be on Dynasty rosters if you're interested. Sort of like back in the day, the Niners had Vernon Davis and Delaney Walker, or just this past year, the Falcons had Kyle Pitts and you know, what was it, Jonnu Smith?
yeah, Johnny Smith.
Yes, and Jonnu Smith was like the guy who went undrafted, and he got more targets than Kyle Pitts. Like he was the actual offensive weapon, and Kyle Pitts is like the guy who's got all the talent.
Like
So,
a giant decoy.
yep.
Yeah, no, Dynasty definitely we have a lot deeper rosters and benches, and you'll have players who are like practice squad guys who are borderline rosterable. But we'll move on to the next pick, the fifth overall pick in the rookie draft. We have Brad Sullivan taking
Mhm.
Jaden Daniels, quarterback, Washington Commanders, the number 2 overall pick in the actual NFL draft.
Mhm. Yeah, so back when I was in high school, Coach Brad was also one of my coaches, and he gave a speech one time that I think really stuck with all of us players. Where he said sometimes it's better to be lucky than to be good. If Jaden Daniels gets to your spot, I'd say you're pretty lucky that the second best quarterback in this draft so far is going to be sliding down to number 5. Um, what I'll say about Jaden Daniels is he provides a lot more rushing upside. I do have my concerns about Jaden Daniels long term being able to take care of himself in the NFL because, I've seen a lot of highlights out of college where Jaden Daniels is jumping into players, jumping into piles, and, that kind of stuff is not going to allow him to have a long, sustained career in the NFL. But, when we look at players like Justin Fields, Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson, one common thing about a lot of these players is their rushing ability really provides them uh, to be able to acquire a lot more points. Jaden Daniels, I think, is clearly going to be the focal point of the offense in Washington. So I think that he would be a great pick because, I mean, what we all know in fantasy football is that I'm pretty sure your league is scores it the same way, but uh, rushing yards are worth more than passing yards. And so maybe this isn't a pick that's going to last for a decade, like a guy like Mahomes would have a couple years ago, or like Josh Allen has been able to. But I think that Jaden Daniels could clearly come in and step in ahead of Jake Browning. It'll be sort of a question on whether or not you'll a question of whether or not Coach Brad is going to start him over Herbert. I think that there is a possibility that Jim Harbaugh, takes a step back with the passing attack for the Chargers and makes it more efficient in the passing category, but really wants to pound the rock. So I don't know if Justin Herbert is going to be the same, viable quarterback option, like, top tier fantasy quarterback, or if he's going to take a step back and be more of like, a game manager, but with, the high talented upside. So I think Jaden Daniels would be a good pick at 5.
And especially with Herbert and the whole Harbaugh thing, I have some shares of Herbert in our other league. The fact that the Chargers didn't really add a wide receiver. I mean, they added Loudon McConkey, but they didn't add a top tier wide receiver. They went with a tackle at number 5 overall. Kind of scares me that receiving core that Herbert would be throwing to is not very good.
Yeah, here's one thing I'll say. Right now, if you had to look at the Chargers depth chart, it would probably be, either Quentin Johnston or Ladd McConkey as wide receiver 1, but I see McConkey as more of like the slot receiver. And then Brandon Rice, the 7th round pick, might be, one of their 3 best receivers. Although Josh Palmer is still on the roster, and he's one of those receivers where fantasy analysts will tell you that he's not good, and his metrics are some of the worst out of all the receivers. But for whatever reason, he is pretty good when Keenan Allen's not in, when Mike Williams is not in. He produces fantasy points. So I don't know. It's going to be a huge change with the Greg Roman offense coming into the Chargers, but I do think that it is good for Coach Brad to have, at least a backup plan at quarterback. And I think Jaden Daniels might end up starting a lot of games for him.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. The more I looked at it after I saw your mock draft and I was putting together the PowerPoint, I was like, okay, that actually makes a ton of sense. With Herbert and with the kind of bare bones quarterback room that Brad has. We'll move on to the next.
Ooh, shots fired.
Yeah. We have Coach Zach at the 106 taking Xavier Worthy, wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs, first round draft capital and the fastest recorded 40 time in NFL history.
Yeah, so I think that's a huge part of it. Xavier Worthy has an opportunity right now to be the replacement for Tyreek Hill that the Chiefs sort of have been looking for ever since they traded Tyreek Hill. Granted, they've won 2 Super Bowls without him now, so it's not necessarily, it hasn't necessarily played out in the way that they need a replacement for Tyreek Hill. But I think Xavier Worthy, I've seen some of his college highlights. He's not just a fast receiver. He can run routes. And I think the fact that the Chiefs traded up in the first round to go out and get, the fastest player who's ever ran a 40 at the combine, I think makes for a good pairing. And then let me scroll over to just take a look at this team. So Coach Zach is stacked at wide receiver. He's got Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, Chris Olave, Tyler Lockett, Cortland Sutton, and then players that I don't have as high, but maybe he's for some reason holding on to because it's a deep dynasty league. Devontae Adams, we don't see him paired with a great quarterback option, so it'll be interesting to see what that offensive coordinator that they got from the Chicago Bears is going to be able to provide. But I know that you guys do 2 flex along with 3 wide receiver sets. So I don't, this pick isn't necessarily so much that Coach Zach needs another wide receiver, and more he needs a flex option to be, another flex option to be able to start, have some Devontae insurance, and there's really no other running backs to take, at this spot.
Yeah, this running back class was not the greatest, but there's a lot of depth at wide receiver, and especially with our league settings, starting 3 wide receivers, and then the 2 flex, you can never really go wrong with having a lot of wide receivers, and especially with Devontae's age. Me and my cousin have debated the age cliff back and forth a lot. I'm definitely more of a youth movement, and he thinks a lot of players will beat Father Time. But getting younger at wide receiver is never a bad idea.
Yeah, and then sorry for the train in the background, but I think that it's less about Devontae Adams' age, because I think we can all agree he's on the back end of his prime if he still is in his prime. But the thing about it is the Raiders have wasted him. He went to the Raiders, wanted to be paired up with Derek Carr, and they didn't even finish the season with Derek Carr in that first season that Devontae was there. And so whether it was Derek Carr's contract or them just firing Josh McDaniels, we're now in this limbo where Devontae Adams still doesn't have a great receiver to throw. A great quarterback to throw to him and really utilize his skill set, but he's still Devontae Adams. So yeah. I think Xavier Worthy would be a great pick right here. He's not the top drafted wide receiver in terms of the NFL, the NFL draft, but Kansas City paired with the fact that Rashee Rice is going to be suspended, I think Xavier Worthy could push Hollywood Brown for that number one wide receiver spot in Kansas City. And we know they don't want to run the ball. We know that they want to throw the ball.
Yeah, and just using strictly the NFL draft as like your order would lead you to be drafting people like Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson back in the day. So it's not necessarily an exact science, and sometimes you got to take the situation along with the talent as well. So we'll kind of move on to the next pick. At 107, you have Phil, or I didn't put his actual team name here. It's a little bit different, but
it's not suitable for YouTube or something.
Well, we've said we had it before. I had him on. He's done his owner interview podcast. It is Pegging Them Softly is his team name.
Oh, I wonder what that could mean.
And he almost won the league, and we joked that like whoever won the league the first year gets to name it. And luckily, we don't have a pegging trophy.
Yeah.
But at 107, which is one of the picks he got when he traded down from 103, you have him taking Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver, Jacksonville Jaguars. I think I put round 2, but I think once he was a first-round draft pick.
Let me take a look right now. He was a first-round draft pick. He was drafted before Xavier Worthy and drafted after Rome Odunze, if we're talking about the scope of when the wide receivers were drafted. But when it comes to Brian Thomas Jr., I think that, I don't know a lot about Brian Thomas Jr. I haven't watched a lot of film on him, but Jacksonville did take him, somewhat high in this draft. And like I said earlier in this sort of podcast, this is a make or break year for Trevor Lawrence. They did not bring back Calvin Ridley, and they're going to, they like to throw the football outside the numbers. I think Brian Thomas Jr. has an opportunity to replace Calvin Ridley in the wide receiver 1 role, because I don't have a lot of faith in Christian Kirk. I don't have a lot of faith in there's one more player that's on Jacksonville that I can't think of the name of.
They signed Gabe Davis, I believe, in the offseason.
Yeah, so Gabe Davis, I mean, I have a lot more faith that the first-round wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars is going to step in that number 1 wide receiver role than the guy who either scores 0 points or scores 40 points. It's up to you if you want to gamble on that, but I think that as long as you're taking a guy who has the upside to, give you Calvin Ridley-like numbers and maybe a little bit of a different skill set, I think it justifies the pick. And then I'm just going to take a look at the team, because I feel like there was a roster construction reason why I had him going to Paris 1422. Right now, the wide receiver 1, I would say, is a toss-up between DK Metcalf and Jaden Reed. I think Jaden Reed right now on Paris 1422, I know that's not his actual team name, on his team, Jaden Reed did very well this past season. I think he surprised a lot of people in being able to sort of emerge as the number 1 wide receiver out of Green Bay. But they've got a platoon of wide receivers. One player can have a great game. They have a loaded wide receiver room. DK Metcalf, he takes himself out of football games a lot. He's sort of he's pretty good when it comes to dynasty. He is one of those names where it's like, oh my God, DK Metcalf is like a star in the NFL, but like he doesn't always produce. Chris Godwin is kind of old, and I feel like he's kind of a shell of himself. T. Higgins just recently requested for a trade, so you don't necessarily know what the Bengals are going to do, with T. Higgins, where he's going to get traded to. And I think that this roster that Paris 1422 has is pretty rounded out pretty well. So I think that Brian Thomas Jr. would make sense, to just add another safe option at wide receiver.
Yeah, that's a solid pick, and can't go wrong with wide receivers. So
Yeah.
Go to the 8th overall pick. We have Coach Slocum, who's a coach I coached with at Moreau. you have him taking Ricky Pearsall, 8th overall, wide receiver to the San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, so when I look at D Sloke's roster, I see it's pretty loaded. It's one of the better rosters in this league, I would have to say, out of the ones that I've seen. But loaded at quarterback, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Aaron Rodgers, you're not going to have any problems, not for a little while. Knock on wood, right? McCaffrey, Kyron Williams, Aaron Jones, you're going to be fine at running back. Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Deontay Johnson. I'd say Amon-Ra and A.J. Brown are clearly your two best receivers. And I don't know that Ricky Pearsall is going to be drafted to this team to make an immediate impact, but there is one thing that I do notice, and it's that this team has Christian McCaffrey and George Kittle. And I have to say, I think that there's going to be another 49er going to this team. And, like I said, this team's rounded out pretty well. They have an opportunity to draft Ricky Pearsall and wait for the 49ers to move off of one of their receivers and then have a starting receiver for the following season. Deontay Johnson moved places. Jameson Williams is kind of hit or miss sometimes, but, is sort of ascending on Detroit. Ricky Pearsall has an opportunity to be either the third wide receiver or fourth wide receiver on this team, I'd say.
Yeah, and he kind of has the luxury of taking a flyer on a higher upside player that he doesn't need right away. Where if he doesn't produce year one, it's not a big deal for his team. It is kind of funny. Slocum is a Cowboys fan, and to have McCaffrey and Kittle and then Pearsall, it's kind of funny that a Cowboys fan would be loaded at Niner players.
Yeah, so maybe he could take Pearsall as trade bait for the fellow Niner fans in this fantasy league that want to get as many Niners as they can, right? Like, I don't know. I saw McCaffrey and Kittle. I just assumed I was looking at a 49er fans team. So that's why I had Pearsall mocked to this team too. Like you said, they have the luxury to take a flyer on a guy with high upside. If Debo goes down, if Ayuk goes down, one thing we can say is that Debo and Ayuk are both fantasy producers. If you just put Pearsall in, he's probably going to be a fantasy producer as well. Shanahan system, I feel like gets really good gets good looks for wide receivers. So I could definitely see it. I think that maybe there's more wide receivers on this roster that D Sloke could cut in order to make room for Ricky Pearsall.
Yeah, he may be a Cowboys fan, but he knows where the talent's at.
Yeah.
Moving on to our next pick, going back to Phil's team at 109, have him taking Keon Coleman, wide receiver to the Buffalo Bills, who ended up being a round 2 pick. Buffalo traded back twice out of the first round, but they took him with the first pick in the second round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Keon Coleman has been a very popular player after the draft because of his personality is showing in the media and everything. So he is already going to be one of those players that fans already know the name of. He's going to a team that is kind of decimated right now in the Bills, but they still have Josh Allen. And Josh Allen just lost Stephon Diggs. You put in Keon Coleman, and I think that you have a pairing that could last for a couple years. Like I said, I think that Paris 1422's team, sort of could use a receiver, and that's why I had him picking. Brian Thomas Jr. Mm-hmm. I feel like this pick maybe will be able to make more of an impact on, more games. So if the picks are flipped, I wouldn't be shocked because Keon Coleman, I think, has a greater opportunity to produce weekly. And Brian Thomas Jr. maybe is, going to be, like I said, the Calvin Ridley replacement. But I don't know. I think that I would take Keon Coleman on my fantasy team, pretty high up. So
I saw today it was like a snippet of his interview where he was talking about a jacket he got back when he played at Michigan State, and he bought it at Macy's, and
yeah.
it was a pretty funny interview, and I think he has a pretty good personality. Um, then rounding up our last pick in the first round, we have John taking J.J. McCarthy, quarterback, Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah. So, JJ McCarthy, I think, has, he's got Justin Jefferson. He's got TJ Hawkinson only, hopefully coming back pretty healed up from that knee injury. I know that you are hoping he comes back immediately, from that knee injury. When I take a look at this team, I don't think that JJ McCarthy is going to start immediately on this fantasy team. I think Jalen Hurts and his tush push is going to just keep carrying touchdowns to John Blunt Jovi. I think that this team is fine at wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb is arguably the best receiver in fantasy football right now. He's probably going to be, working for that contract extension. I know that, was it D-Sloke is probably begging that John Blunt Jovi trades, CeeDee Lamb to him. But at running back, I like I said before, this draft is kind of a barren wasteland at running back. I think that this roster is fine staying put at running back, or even taking a guy in later rounds. JJ McCarthy would be a good quarterback to pair up with Jordan. Could have that stack. But yeah, I have JJ McCarthy going to John Blunt Jovi because I don't think Daniel Jones is going to be contributing that much longer.
Yeah, I think long term Daniel Jones, like there's rumors that the Giants were looking to replace him in this draft, and you could argue McCarthy is going into one of the best situations for a rookie quarterback with arguably the best wide receiver in football, arguably a top 5 tight end, and they have a decent running back with Aaron Jones coming over from Green Bay to Minnesota. So he's in a good situation. And when you have a quarterback like Jalen Hurts, it lets you take a more safer, more upside, less upside, but better floor quarterback. Because you might not need that much. You might use him for more of a backup or a bye week fill in. But Jalen Hurts also runs the risk of getting hurt. He has gotten banged up a couple times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think it's in John Blunt Jovi's best interest to draft a quarterback, whether it be J.J. McCarthy or Drake May. I personally think that McCarthy has a better supporting cast, so that's why I lean McCarthy.
All right, and that ends our first round. So we had a total of five wide receivers, 3 quarterbacks, 1 running back, and 1 tight end. It just kind of shows the strength of this draft is wide receivers. This 2024 NFL draft class. But we're going to move on to round 2, and I have the first overall pick in round 2, and you have me taking Ladd McConkey, wide receiver of the Los Angeles Chargers.
Yeah, so I mean, we knew going into this NFL draft that the Chargers were going to need a wide receiver. They just traded away Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams did not re-sign with the team. And the Chargers probably would have taken a wide receiver in the first round, but that's just not the way that Jim Harbaugh is going to operate a football team that he's going to rebuild. I think that Joe Alt was the smart pick because he wants to build that offensive line. And because like, what's the use of a wide receiver who's going to be getting open if your quarterback's going to be on the ground about 5 yards in the backfield? So I don't have a lot of faith in Quentin Johnston, and I really feel like we could see the Chargers not necessarily favor the deep passing game, but maybe favor a more run first sort of offense, and then play action off of it, sort of like, I mean, we've seen the Jim Harbaugh, Greg Roman offenses, And I think that Ladd McConkey, he's not a tight end per se. And I know that, Greg Roman really likes to feature his tight ends. Ladd McConkey being selected as high as he is a good sign, because I think he probably steps in and is probably going to be maybe the best wide receiver on the roster. And I have to ask you, I know you're a 49er fan and you're wearing a 49er jersey right now. You're happy Jim Harbaugh's coming back, right? Like, does that get you excited at all? Like, or are you like an anti-Harbaugh?
Oh no,
more than
I'm
anything?
for sure a Harbaugh fan. I was rooting for Michigan because I like Harbaugh. I loved Harbaugh as a coach. Um, being a SoCal guy now, I don't have a second team. The Niners are my team.
Yeah.
People are, well, what's your second team? I don't have a second team.
Mhm.
If I was going to root for another team, I would root for the Chargers, like an AFC team, especially now with Harbaugh. He's good for the NFL. He's a good personality. He kind of brings some life into that team, and that they're the little brothers of Southern California with the Rams. But both LA teams are very fair weather. LA's, if you're not winning, they don't matter. And you know this as a Niner fan. Like, we go play the Rams, and there's more Niner fans down there than Rams fans.
Yeah. I mean, that's true for a lot of road games that the 49ers have.
That is true.
But 49er fans definitely travel well. But, one thing that sort of intrigues me about Ladd McConkey was after day one of the NFL draft, the 49ers selected Ricky Pearsall, and Matt Mayoko, the 49er insider, had this tweet basically saying that, the 49ers went and chose Pearsall, but a scout told them that Ladd McConkey is going to have a better career than Ricky Pearsall, guaranteed. So I don't know if there might be, some sort of attraction to the whole pairing with Harbaugh. The Chargers are sort of rebuilding. Herbert's a good quarterback to be able to distribute the football to Ladd McConkey, but I think the upside's there, and Ladd McConkey could be one of those sneaky picks.
I did like. I remember watching the draft and the story they ran with McConkey, and he gave his jersey to one of the kids, and the kid was on like College Game Day. It was a good story. I think he's gonna fit into that slot role, and maybe the Chargers are gonna try and emulate like a Cooper Kupp type role for him, and that's kind of a pigeonholing him because he's a white wide receiver, but. Cooper Kupp's a solid slot guy, and I think McConkey fits into that slot role pretty well for the
Yeah,
Chargers.
and even Hunter Renfrow just a couple of years ago was fantasy viable until Josh McDaniels rolled in. So, you
Yeah,
know, if you want to compare him to other white slot receivers, I'd say he is more on par with Renfrow and Cooper Kupp than he is with Trent Taylor.
yeah. No, he's definitely got a lot of talent. Move on to the next pick. Kyle taking Rome Odunze, wide receiver, Chicago Bears, got first round draft capital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so essentially earlier in the draft, the second pick of the first round, I had Kyle MC 212 taking Caleb Williams. What perfect, wide receiver to take than to take, if you're going to bet on Caleb Williams, why not just double down and get the pairing of Romo Dunze along to go with Caleb Williams? When I look at this roster, I think that the need was more there at quarterback than there was at wide receiver. Obviously, there's a need at tight end on this team because Dalton Kincaid is your best tight end. There's Donald Parham, and then it just really falls off on this roster. No offense. Cooper Kupp isn't getting any younger. Drake London, we'll have to see. We'll have to see how he produces now that Kirk Cousins is the quarterback. I think Drake London's stock is rising. But I don't have faith in Wan'Dale Robinson. Jonathan Mingo, I liked him last year, but he really didn't show much. Michael Thomas is, on the back nine of his career. I think Rome Odunze is going to be not necessarily featured in the offense, but Keenan Allen is getting up there in age. DJ Moore is a different skill set, I would say, than Rome Odunze. I think the Chicago Bears might run 3 tight end sets, and Caleb Williams, I think on right after they both got drafted, went and already started building chemistry with Rome Odunze. So I could see the pairing on this fantasy team. I think they both fit needs on this team, and that's why I have them mocked to Kyle MC 212.
Yeah, definitely nothing wrong with getting that stack, both in their rookie year, and if they end up growing together and becoming a force in the league, you'll have them just like the Bears would have them. So that's a solid pairing. We have Paris Phil taking at the 203 Drake May, quarterback, New England Patriots, went third overall in the NFL draft.
Yeah, so I essentially made this selection to Paris 1422's team, not necessarily because Drake May is going to push Joe Burrow to start, but he is a first-round quarterback, apparently needs a little bit of development and doesn't necessarily have the best weapons around him. But, he is probably the best quarterback left available from this draft. There's Michael Penix Jr., but I don't see anybody in this draft drafting Michael Penix Jr. when he's going to be buried behind Kirk Cousins and he might get picked in a later round in this dynasty draft, but I don't see it in the first 2 rounds. I think that Joe Burrow is going to be fine, and Drake May has the upside to where he can be a solid starter. Geno Smith is on this roster, but I don't know how much longer the Seahawks are going to ride with Geno Smith. I think Drake May has the upside of, if the Patriots are going to struggle for another year, they can draft another weapon to pair with him, and they can sort of build onto, what they're essentially trying to do with Drake May. They obviously plan for him to be the quarterback of the future. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts that you'd be willing to share about Drake May? Because I haven't watched enough tape on him. I just know that he's a first-round quarterback.
I haven't really watched the tape on Drake May too much, but I know my cousin was a huge Drake May proponent going back to the college football season. I know a lot of people see a lot of Josh Allen in him, and if you can get the next Josh Allen with the second round pick, it's probably a win-win on the value chart there, compared to Josh Allen went in the second round of our startup draft compared to a second round of a rookie draft. Having a big bodied guy who can run. New England is a little bit of a project. There's not a lot of weapons there for him. But having Joe Burrow let you take a flyer on him, you could put him on your taxi squad for a year while Geno Smith is still around. But eventually, Geno Smith ain't going to be the starter anymore. So you're going to need a backup. And if you have the luxury to kind of wait and take a flyer on a guy like Drake May, the talent's there.
Yeah, I think he's probably a perfect taxi squad player. He's not. I don't think he's going to hit the ground running, but by the end of when he does start to pick it up, like you said, the upside is there for him to, maybe the ceiling is Josh Allen. So if you're taking a guy that isn't going to have to start for you and has potentially that upside, I think it's worth a second round pick.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on to the 4th pick in the second round, we have Jeremy taking Malik Neighbors, wide receiver, New York Giants.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of red flags coming out about Malik Neighbors, but I think he's probably clearly the best wide receiver left in this draft. And he got selected in the top 10. He went like number 6 overall to the Giants.
Correct.
There was sort of speculation that the Chargers might take Neighbors, and I don't know if Arizona ever wavered from Marvin Harrison Jr., but I know that the upper class of wide receivers in this draft sort of had Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. Neck and neck, which I don't know if I entirely agree with, but there were draft experts putting them both together. I think that Jeremy can take a flyer on Malik Neighbors. I don't know if Daniel Jones is going to be the perfect quarterback to distribute the ball to Malik Neighbors. And I don't think Malik Neighbors seems very happy to be in New York. But maybe next year they might, get the replacement for Daniel Jones. And then we're looking at Malik Neighbors as like a much more appealing, prospect. When I look at Jeremy's team, he doesn't have the immediate need at wide receiver. He really has more of a need at running back. But like I said, there's no running backs. We're in a running back drought right now in terms of like drafting rookie prospects. I'd say there was only probably one really good option, and that already went to B21 sweeps, earlier in this mock draft. So Jamar Chase is going to start. Ayuk, as long as he's not holding out, should start. Devontae Smith, isn't necessarily the best starting option, but I'd say he's better than Jackson Smith and Jigba, DJ Chark, Christian Watson, Jahan Dodson. Like I'd pair the last 4 guys that I mentioned to be sort of around the same tier. I don't have a lot of faith in Jackson Smith and Jigba personally. I drafted him last year, and then I literally sat down, I think after week 1, and I watched the film. I think the Seahawks were playing the Rams, and I watched both sides of the football, and I saw Puka Nacua on one side of the football, and I saw Jackson Smith and Jigba on the other side. And I saw one receiver in Nacua who was like blocking every single play, just like really impressive. And then with JSN, it was just the complete opposite. It was a guy who was giving low effort, and I was like, wow, I spent a first-round pick on this player. I can confidently say I put in a lot of fab for Puka and got him, and he won me my fantasy championship. So ring number 4. But to get back to this league, I think Malik Neighbors has the talent there. He just needs the quarterback to perform well in order to get him the football. Daniel Jones is probably going to be replaced. I don't think he lasts very much longer in the NFL as a starter. And this is more of a long-term play at quarterback. But I think Neighbors has a good opportunity to be featured in the New York offense because they just lost Saquon too.
And I can definitely see, like you said, the red flags. There was a video of him like arriving in New York, and he does not look happy. Does not look happy. Like he wants to be there, and that's not necessarily a good thing. You want someone invested. You want someone who's gonna put the effort. I'm not saying he for sure will or won't. But I think I saw another clip even before the draft where they're like, "Oh, what would happen if you got drafted to New York?" And he was like, he just didn't seem thrilled about it. Could make it a steal for if he falls this far, like a diamond in the rough type pick if because of the talent.
Yeah, I mean he's a top 10 NFL prospect, so there is the upside there, but there are red flags also. I think in the middle of the second round is a perfect place to get him. If he slides further, it's going to be should be a good draft pick. Obviously if it doesn't work out, then it's not going to work out. But he is going to be the focal point, I think, of that New York Giants offense. So there is that to look forward to. And then going back to the whole, he doesn't look happy to be there. I saw this interview where he was like asked if he's reached out to Daniel Jones, and he's like, no, I haven't talked to Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I feel like I saw that too. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that works out. is it going to pan out or not? So moving on to the next pick, we have Brad taking at the 205 Xavier Legette, wide receiver, Carolina Panthers, who probably has the best accent. We've heard him talk. It's a very, very fun to listen to him talk. The accent doesn't match what you would predict him to sound like, but
What kind of accent does he have?
it was very, very deep country, like Southern.
I think I did hear it. I'm just like, forgetting on the spot here. But yeah, I have Xavier Legette going to Coach Brad's team because I think Mike Evans is sort of getting up there in age. Keenan Allen's getting up there in age. Hollywood Brown should be good this year on the Chiefs. And then didn't Curtis Samuel just change teams too? So I think Curtis Samuel, is definitely more intriguing than the rest of the wide receivers that are on this team. But I think that Coach Brad has this like huge list of players that are just like, their stock is falling rather than rising. And Xavier Legette, I want to say, is the last first round wide receiver that is, available according to this mock draft that I've done. He is going to step into Carolina and I think probably be the focal point of the passing game. And Carolina is not in a position right now where they're going to want to tank. I think, they don't have their draft picks because they traded up, to get Bryce Young a year ago. And really, like, in retrospect, with the way that things played out this year, they looked like morons, for doing that. Like, they traded up all that capital. Bryce Young didn't look good. They got the first overall pick. And then this year, their pick that they traded away was the first overall pick, and they didn't even get to reap any benefit of it. Legette, I think, was promised by the Carolina GM that they were going to get him at the 32nd overall pick. I think that at the 33rd overall pick. No, they did get him at the back half of the first round. Sorry.
Yeah,
they said they were going to get him with the first pick of the second round, but then they said they just decided they were going to trade up. They didn't want to see whether or not Buffalo was going to get him. I think that they're very interested in him, and what is Adam Thielen going to turn it up a notch after last season? Like, I think Adam Thielen will be better now with Xavier Legette, essentially helping him get open because he'll be able to draw away attention, but. We're seeing two skill position players in those first two rounds for the Carolina Panthers. I think that they're set to, feature the two players that they drafted.
Yeah, and with Carolina coming up and getting them in the fifth round, it gives them the fifth-year option with him, which helps with a little security long term, because that is something you got to think about in Dynasty. Long-term contracts, how many years does this person have, how many years of guaranteed money. There's a lot more to think about than just the player, so having that extra year of potentially like security on a contract on a team is a good thing.
Yeah, before we move on from the whole Carolina Panthers trade, there's two ways in the NFL to acquire the first overall pick. There's you either trade up, all your assets in order to get it, or you tank and you get the first overall pick. The Carolina Panthers are the first team that I've seen that have done both, in the span of a season. So I think the more idiotic part about it is that Caleb Williams is a better prospect and always was a better prospect than Bryce Young. Bryce Young is super small, but they really wanted him right then and there. They could have just waited and tanked, but they did both.
Yeah, that was a 101 in team mismanagement by a masterclass by the Panthers. Moving on to the next pick, breaks our running back drought. We have my own team at the 206 taking Trey Benson, running back of the Arizona Cardinals, who got third round draft capital in the NFL draft. And kind of makes sense with how bad my running back room is for me to be the one, ending that drought of running back.
Yeah. So you essentially are the only person in this mock draft right now who has picked a running back, and you're picking two of them, and they're picks based on need. They're not picks based on talent. Your team is decimated at running back. Trey Benson, I think, has an opportunity to take over for James Conner. James Conner is up there in age, in terms of running backs. And like I said, there's not a lot out there for running backs. Like, for those of you who are still, who get to this portion, and maybe you turned it off earlier because you're like, oh, no running backs. Like this person doesn't know much about dynasty football. Like, I understand the desire for adding to your running back, core, but there really is not a lot of options. Like, the first running back taken in this draft was in the second round. That was the only one in the first two rounds. And then Trey Benson. And then, I think the next running back on the list, paired with another one that we'll talk about later on, were the only ones taken in the third round. But, there's starters already ahead of a couple of these guys. So it's not necessarily like there isn't a clear path to where they're going to be this superstar Saquon Barkley, superstar, Ezekiel Elliott's walking into the Cowboys when he was a rookie, or, like that caliber of player. There's just not in this draft. Bijan Robinson was supposed to be that last year, and even he wasn't, obviously because the head coach was like an idiot, but wanted to draft Bijan to be a decoy. But, I think Trey Benson may be able to be the running back too, to help James Conner.
Yeah, no, definitely there's a difference between like Breece Hall was a second round running back pick, but he was coming in clear cut. Everyone knew he was going to be a good running back. Like Brooks is the considered the best running back of this class, and he has question marks with it coming off the ACL. But it shows how bad my running back room is. That I was hoping I had DeAndre Swift and Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson, and I was hoping Swift would go somewhere else. And then he ended up signing with the Bears, and I'm like, great. Now I have all three running backs for the Bears, and really no one else. But I'm hoping one of these running backs is probably going to hit. Hopefully, if not, I'll be looking for running back again next year. This is a long-term team rebuild that I've been going through, but hopefully one of them will pan out to be a starter for me.
Yeah, your team essentially in this upcoming draft is either going to be, all right, we're tanking again for the top running back prospect, or you're just going to be the person in the league who just sends out a bunch of offers just trying to get at least one guy who's startable, at running back.
Yeah, we'll see how it pans out. They say, or I've definitely kind of felt like my own philosophy with Dynasty is you go for the running backs when you're ready to compete, because their shelf life is so short. It's how I've built my team. I'm going to try and hopefully get some wide receiver core for a foundation, and then I'll do what I got to do to get the running back when I feel like my team's ready to compete.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, we have another running back. So now we're starting a string of running backs. At the 207, we have John taking Blake Corum, running back, Los Angeles Chargers, with a round 3 draft capital.
Yeah, so I think Blake Corum definitely is an interesting prospect because he was great at Michigan. The only problem is that he got drafted to be right behind. I'm trying to think of the running back's name right now on the Rams.
The Chargers. He's on the Rams. That was my mistake. I kind of mentally put him with Harbaugh. But yeah, no, he's on the Rams, not on the Chargers. Ignore the Chargers.
Yeah. See, you wanted to pair him. All right. If he would have went to the Chargers, he would be way up in this draft. He would be a first round probably pick in this mock draft. But the fact that he went to the Rams and he's going to be behind, starts with a K.
Kyren Williams.
Kyren Williams. Thank you. I wanted to say Kyle Williams, but I was just about to inflict PTSD on myself thinking about that player. But when it comes to Kyren Williams, I feel like we're going to see what we saw last year with, Kenneth Walker was the clear-cut running back one going into Seattle last year, and then for whatever reason they decided they were going to draft Zach Charbonnet, and it made things awkward come draft season. Like, how are you going to rank this player? But I think when it comes to Blake Corum, I'm going to treat it kind of exactly how it played out in Seattle, and I'm just going to assume that Kyren Williams is the number one back and really isn't going to be pushed for it. But Blake Corum's kind of going to be like the guy who steps in if Kyren has to, miss any time. And, like you said, with the shelf life of running backs, Kyren Williams is young. I think he was just drafted last year. If Kyren Williams still takes over that backfield, when is Blake Corum, in terms of the longevity, when is he ever going to transcend and be the running back one? Like, unless he's just better than Kyren, but Kyren was arguably the best running back besides Christian McCaffrey in fantasy football. So, I'd say you favor the guy who's already proven it. So, that's why he fell in this draft. If he would have went to the Cowboys or the Chargers, he would have been a first round pick.
Yeah, it just shows the lack of depth at running back in this draft, because he's probably going to be viewed as like a quality handcuff, where if Kyren Williams goes down, he's like plug and play. But almost like Ronnie Rivers wasn't plug and play when Kyren Williams went down. Their running game did suffer when Kyren Williams went out. So Blake Corum, who some may be viewed as like a top prospect coming into the draft, that landing spot just tanked his value maybe a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the landing spots have more to do with where these guys go in fantasy football than their actual draft stock, which is why I'm not going to spoil it, but there is a player later in this draft that I think really shows that. And I also the player I'm referring to is going to be what I thought was going to be Mr. Irrelevant of this draft. We're only mocking the first 2 rounds, so I just assumed there were only 2 rounds in this draft, which is why I have a player mocked at the number 10 spot in the second round. But we'll get there.
All right, we'll move on to the 208. We have Coach Slocum taking Malachi Corley, wide receiver, to the New York Jets in round 3.
Yeah, so with Malachi Corley, he's going to a team that is going to be competent when it comes to passing, because they're going to get the return of Aaron Rodgers. We're not going to see the Zach Wilson offense anymore. Even if Rodgers goes down, it's not going to be Zach Wilson unless Denver pulls off some sort of trade to just torture Jets fans, and fantasy managers. But like I said, this team right now, D Sloke's team is loaded. So there's not necessarily much that can be added to the tight end spot in terms of players left available in this draft. But Malachi Corley, I think, is a very interesting option to add. I want to say I projected that another wide receiver would be added earlier. Yeah, Ricky Pearsall would be added earlier in this draft to D Sloke's team. I think Malachi Corley is a guy who probably will make an impact sooner rather than later. So Pearsall is kind of like the long play at wide receiver. Corley is kind of the guy who might make an impact more now than later, and be like sort of the wide receiver 2 to Garrett Wilson. But essentially, what's going to happen after Rodgers retires? That's sort of why Corley fell. because you immediately assume, okay, wide receiver taken in the first 3 rounds paired up with Aaron Rodgers, that's going to be good. How long is Rodgers going to last? I think he has 1 or 2 years left.
Yeah, the other thing too is going to a team like the Jets where they already have their clear-cut wide receiver one with Garrett Wilson. Will a player like Corley ever be more than just the second option?
Yeah.
It's like the Jordan Addison with the Justin Jefferson last year. A lot of people viewed that like as potentially a negative to a very talented player, where it's like, okay, well, you're never going to be the number one with a player like Justin Jefferson around.
Yeah, or a guy like Michael Penix Jr. When is he ever going to be the number one with Kirk Cousins being paid like a franchise quarterback?
Such a wild pick. That's for another time. But man, that was a shocking pick to say the least.
Mm.
We got the first pick of Coach Sullivan, Chad Sullivan. He traded me his first round pick to acquire Stephon Diggs. So this is his first pick in this draft. You have him taking Marshawn Lloyd, running back of the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, so I think the upside with Marshawn Lloyd is that in years past they would do sort of a two-headed running back monster with Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon. So I think that there is potential for Marshawn Lloyd to maybe get some snaps, but I think what's a little bit different is that Josh Jacobs, I'm just going to say this, I think he's a much better running back than Aaron Jones. And probably is like more consistently and is a lot more available than Aaron Jones was in his career with the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Jones was kind of like in and out of the lineup, which is why AJ Dillon was able to, have those weeks where he was good. Except for this past year, AJ Dillon was awful. He was, even when Aaron Jones was out, AJ Dillon was not good. But, what we know about running backs is, when they're young, they've got fresh legs. AJ Dillon has gotten more miles on him. And I think that they're going to feature the run game a little bit more. If Josh Jacobs goes down, then Marshawn Lloyd will already just be worth the pick because Coach Sullivan is going to have a running back that he can start, any given week if Josh Jacobs goes down. And what we know from Josh Jacobs last year is that, he played, I want to say like the first half of the season. And then, towards the end of the season, he was not playing. Zamir White was playing. And then Zamir White was the viable starter in fantasy. When I look at Coach Sullivan's roster, it's loaded across the board except for running back. This really, I think, fills a need, but isn't going to be a player that's going to be startable every single week.
Yeah, I actually really liked Marshawn Lloyd going into the draft. He was kind of like one of my guys I was hope would fall. Watching him play at USC and kind of seeing him at the combine, but that landing spot is rough. It's hard to take a player high in the first round or early in the second round when there's no clear cut like route to be a starter. And especially from just me personally with my team, I need guys who I can start potentially, not guys who are, a year out, 2 years out potentially. I could probably need more of the starters. But yeah, that draft capital, that landing spot, definitely, it was almost like the Zach Charbonnet last year, kind of to me, where he was a player I really liked before the draft, and then it was like, well, shit, that landing spot hurt.
Yeah, well, there goes his career. He had a good one going into the draft.
And it hurt me in other aspects too, because I had some Ken Walker stock, and I'm like, oh man, it kind of sucked seeing that kind of tank his stock a little bit. But
so, did you trade away Ken Walker in reaction to the Zach Charbonnet pick?
No, I held on. I was hoping it was kind of going to be more like a Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon type situation where they draft him for more depth, but I still have him on my other team in my other league, and he's I'm hoping he can fend off Charbonnet for the starting reps like he did last year.
Mhm.
Well, we're gonna come to the last pick of our mock draft.
Yeah. So what I thought was Mr. Irrelevant here. Now this is going to be the most shocking pick in the draft, but I thought this was like Mr. Irrelevant across the board. I did not know that there are 5 rounds in this dynasty draft, which kind of like, it kind of depressed me. I'm like, wow, there's some major needs that need to be filled, and free agency is going to be wild because you guys are going to be like adding a whole bunch of players like after the draft. I thought this was like a 2-round draft since we're only mocking the first 2 rounds, which it sort of seems like it's good that we're mocking the first 2 rounds because we're about an hour and 10 into our recording, and we're finally getting to the final player. But really, an hour and 10 is nothing compared to the silver and gold streams that we do. Like, we had like back-to-back streams where one was almost 4 hours, and then the other one was like over 4 hours reacting to the first round of the draft. So I just want you to know it's not just quantity over quality in the silver and gold. It's quantity and quality. So getting back to this pick, Brendan Rice. So I just, like I sort of asked you earlier when I asked you your thoughts on Jim Harbaugh. I really don't believe in Quentin Johnston. I don't think he's that good. So Brendan Rice, I think, has more of an opportunity to be a receiver that plays on the outside more than Lad McConkey. I think McConkey is more of that slot receiver, sort of prototype. Brendan Rice, I feel like, could find himself being a starting wide receiver. I think that Jim Harbaugh probably has known Brendan Rice for a very long time now because Jim Harbaugh coached for the 49ers and Jerry Rice is at every, nearly every 49er game and is pretty involved with the team and like, the players. So I'd have to imagine there was that connection there back like about, 10 years ago or over 10 years ago now. Brendan Rice was, originally supposed to be drafted. He was projected to be drafted several rounds before where he eventually fell in the draft at round 7. So it might be shocking to see a round 7 wide receiver here, but I think that the landing spot definitely helped him as opposed to a bunch of other wide receivers that like sort of filled out in the middle rounds because like we saw the 49ers took another receiver to push their roster to 11 wide receivers. So it's like there are teams that maybe might pass the ball more, but if it wouldn't be Brendan Rice here, I mean, the options are Jalen Polk, Adonai Mitchell, but really this is not a very deep draft class in the other positions. So you just kind of have to take your pick at wide receiver. There's Luke McCaffrey, Roman Wilson, Jermaine Burton, a whole bunch of guys that went before Brendan Rice. But I think it's one of those sexy picks, but really it's kind of ugly because he's a 7th round wide receiver.
Yeah, I was very shocked to see him fall like he did. And that kind of maybe just shows how many mock drafts the ESPN experts, Field Yates, the Mel Kipers, like how much they really know or don't know. But yeah, I like Brendan Rice as a prospect. I was shocked to see him fall, but he does land in a good position. He's got the name value being Jerry Rice's son. And if he is a 10th of what his dad is, he'll be a successful NFL player.
Yeah. And, I just think that, I thought he was going to be Mr. Irrelevant here. So, there are a number of options that you could have gone with in terms of other receivers. And Coach Ingles definitely didn't pay me behind the scenes to make everybody else sort of flock to Brendan Rice earlier in drafts. So that's not going on. Wink, wink. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good landing spot. And there is, I think, potential for him to be featured, but not necessarily be a consistent, player. But it's a guy that we all know rather than a nobody who, just sort of gets drafted in the middle of a draft.
If you're gonna take a dart throw, why not throw the dart at a name like Brendan Rice?
Yeah. If there's one mock that I'm least confident is going to happen, it's this one.
Well, that's the fun. So it's getting a different perspective, different look. Everyone's gonna view these players differently and have different views on how they rank players. And I wanted an outside perspective. I could have had one of our league mates do it, but I didn't want any bias or like pushing anyone in any direction. So I really appreciate you coming on. And
You got the best outside perspective. You got the very best. The 4-time out of the past 8-year champion in fantasy football. So listen to my advice, except for that final pick, which I thought was the first of the free agents. But yeah, check out the YouTube channel, Silver and Gold Pod. I think you're going to attach the link to it in the description.
Yes, I'll definitely be putting that in our description so everyone can watch. You have 2 leagues that I send these to, so hopefully give Josh a look. Check out his channel. Give him some support for coming on and doing this mock draft for you guys. Just to recap, round 2, we have 1 quarterback, 6 wide receivers, and 3 running backs in Josh's mock draft. We are probably going to do our rookie drafts either end of May, sometime in the next month, within the next month, as long as everyone gets their dues in. I send in a text to everyone, and I got some of them responded right away. I appreciate that. We'll be getting this mock draft going. We'll see how many landing spots you correctly predicted. I could definitely see some of them being correct, and it was a good time talking ball with you. Like I said, make sure to go check out his channel. And I wanted to just say thank you again for coming on and doing this, taking the time. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I'm happy to be here. And I just want to say, if the mock draft doesn't go the way that, I think that it should go, then you guys are probably going to be taking Lorenzo's advice in a couple of weeks when he finally gets on this podcast. And I just want to remind you guys, Lorenzo is a 1-time champion in my league. That was a mistake. I could be 5 or 6-time champion. So
a little bit of fun trash talk. That's what fantasy football is all about.
Yeah, no, it's all love. Coach Ingles coached Lorenzo and I, so it's playful jab, and Lorenzo is going to get me back.
Yeah, we haven't recorded that one yet. He's going to do the other league, which is a super flex league, so it'll be a different perspective. But yeah, I'm planning on recording that within the next couple of days, hopefully. But yeah, thank you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and we'll be talking to you guys soon.
All right. Thank you, Coach Ingles.